Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Ocean Expert Exchange. Scientists in every Florida school and the Anjari Foundation are excited to have you here for our live webinar events with ocean science and technology experts. In this monthly series, we dive into all things marine science and explore what's happening in the field. We look at interesting careers and more. And today we'll be speaking with Lindy Clyde Knowles of the Bahamas National Trust about his work with marine protected areas. But first, we'd like to tell you just a little bit about our programs. The Scientist in Every Florida School is a free program housed within the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The mission of CEFS is to engage Florida K-12 teachers and students in the cutting-edge research that's happening across our state and beyond by providing science role models and experiences like today that we hope will inspire future stewards of our planet. Our partner, Anjari Foundation, is a nonprofit headquartered in West Palm Beach, Florida, and the foundation supports and promotes marine science research and education. And many of the foundation's primary initiatives involve its 65-foot research vessel, the RV Anjari. In case you missed anything from today's preview slides, we like to mention and remind you that you can submit questions for our scientist by typing them in the chat box, and we'll get to those a little bit later today. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to Lindy Knowles. Lindy, I'm going to go ahead and stop share and turn things over to you at this time. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lindy Knowles. I am a Senior Science Officer at the Bahamas National Trust. Today we'll be discussing the management, establishment, and monitoring of protected areas in the Bahamas. So, for those who don't know where the Bahamas is, we are located to the southeast of Florida in the US of A and to the northeast of Cuba in the West Indies. We are a small landmass country with a large oceanic space that comprises the Lucayan Archipelago. A little bit about me before we head on. So I'm a Bahamian, spent all of my childhood in the Bahamas, and pretty much outside of some work conferences and my education, I've been here. I first started off at the University or the College of the Bahamas, now the University of the Bahamas, where I pursued an associate's degree in biology with chemistry. Then I hopped over to Jamaica to the University of the West Indies, where I planned unsuccessfully to go towards a degree in medicine before realizing I really like the environment and I probably should not go to something I would likely hate. So then I came home and I graduated at the height of the global recession. So I spent some time in a bank before I found my way to the Bahamas National Trust, where I spent about 5 years trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the environmental field, which of course is I love to be in the marine environment. And to give you a little bit of background on the Bahamas National Trust, we're the organization created by government, so we're a non-profit organization similar to what the Anjari is, and we are responsible for managing 33 national parks in the national park system on behalf of the government in trust for the people, thus the name the Bahamas National Trust. So the sites we manage are marine, terrestrial, and cultural sites, and we've been around for about 65 years, and we protect millions of acres of land, sea, and historic sites. We protect flamingos in the Nago National Park in the southern part of the Bahamas, parrots in the Abaco National Park in the northern part, as well as large tracts of coral reefs, seagrass, and sand bottoms throughout our MPA network. So after spending about 5 years at the BNT, I decided, okay, it's time to further my education. So I popped back into university, went back to the University of the West Indies, but deciding to switch it up a little bit, went to Barbados instead of Jamaica, where I got a master's degree in natural resource management. And that's pretty much been the ground zero for where I've really focused on the marine environment. And I did that for about a year, and I spent my research project trying to create a reef system for the country of Barbados, identifying where the reefs, seagrass, corals, sandy beaches were around the whole island so that they could help plan for the future development of the island. Then I, of course, returned back home once again to the BNT, where I spent another 5 years working on projects designed to expand the protected area system, to monitor those that we do have, and to make sure that whatever we do is science driven, which is every step of the process is guided by science and not just built on emotions or what we feel is right, which sometimes aligns, sometimes doesn't. Then I had a friend slash colleague convinced me to go back to school once again. And this time I went back to school to learn about conservation leadership, or how to oversee organizations that run conservation programs. And so I took a year on that, and timely as it was, I did that in the middle of the uh, coronavirus pandemic. So when I was out of been home, sitting down, twiddling my thumbs, passing time when we were locked down, I actually took an opportunity, traveled to another country, learned more about my field, and then after that was said and done, popped back home. And as you can see here, our logo changed. We had a rebrand, though I did pretty much the same work. And at this point, I'm back to where I've been here since 2021. So, speaking of BNT, we have to speak about protected areas because that's what we manage. And since I'm talking about marine protected areas, I will start off with a protected area, then just everything I'm saying, think of it in the water. So, a protected area, as defined by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is basically everybody around the world coming together to define the definition, kind of like the dictionary. This one is the Conservation Dictionary, and it says that a protected area must have clear and defined boundaries. So, this one I'm using, whoops, going back, is the Exuma Keys Land and Sea Park, the oldest MPA that is under protection at the Bahamas National Trust. This one was established in 1959. Now, that one is not a square, not a rectangle, probably a parallelogram. It's a quadrangle that protects 176 square miles of land and sea in the Exuma Keys Land and Sea Park. We have 4 points that define the boundaries in the marine environment, and we have them identified in the corner. Now, it must be legally defined. So on this screen here, you could see a copy of the first page of our lease. Now, this one was done in 1964. And in it, it had the boundaries of the protected area identified wherever you could, no, why is it going back? Sorry. So this is given to us, to the Bahamas National Trust, from the government of Bahamas, saying, we give you this lease. You are hereby responsible for the seabed within these boundaries. And then, of course, a protected area must protect cultural and or ecological features. So in the top picture there, we have a pillar coral. At the bottom middle, we have our good red mangrove and our creek systems. And on the west, this bottom right side, we have an example of some of the islands and creek systems we have within the Exuma Keys Land and Sea Park. Now, I want to say, going back up, the Bahamas has historically been very fond of using protected areas as a means of environmental protection. Our first protected area ever was founded in 1892. This was called the Sea Gardens, and the Sea Gardens allegedly was formed because a university in the US had come down to the Bahamas with excavating equipment and ripped up an entire coral reef to take back home to their aquarium. The outcry of the community on New Providence, which is the island I live on and the capital island for the country, was enough that the colonial government said, hey, we'll set aside this area that you can't take fish from and you can't bother anything growing on the surface. So by extension, based on what we've seen before, it had defined boundaries, it was protecting biodiversity, and it had rules and regulations. And that area became the first protected area, and that lasted maybe about 60 years before it was removed, as the area became a very important hotspot for transport to and from the islands, and there was some degradation. However, in recent years, the same site, at least a portion of that same site, has been incorporated into a larger protected area around the same island. So, st historically speaking, our approach to protected area management has always been reactionary. So that one was the result of a university extracting a coral reef to put in an aquarium. And then later on in life, we had the Exuma Keys Land and Sea Park was created because this guy, Howard Hughes, you may have remember, there's a Leonardo DiCaprio movie, but he was a very wealthy guy from the 1940s, 50s, who decided he wanted to merge about 20 of the islands in the Exumas to create a super island that would be his private island to get away from everybody. And towards the end of his life, he was going kind of a bit crazy. So it all worked out. And the government was like, nope, put that aside, protected area, all those lands are off limits. And that's how we got our first protected area. There was no research done to reinforce the area. And it actually turned out to be one guy doing his master's degree or his PhD who was sent down from the Bronx Zoo in New York to go and collect data. And that was enough to justify the protected areas. We didn't care about zoning at the time. Protected area management globally was all about removing people from the environment and looking at the environment as untouched, pristine, whereas we know now that humans have been impacting the environment for a very long time, and not just impacting, but also modifying, tweaking, and improving the environment where they had. We It was a problematic approach, and it led to the challenges and struggles in the community where we were basically keeping everybody away. And at one point in the 1980s, we changed the laws of the park to make sure that nobody could even fish in the park, which causes problems later on for us to manage. And that being said, prior to, and I shouldn't say prior to, each park was created because of an outcry throughout the country. So the Nago National Park in the south was created because the flamingo population, which had been widespread throughout the Bahamas and even throughout Florida, as you may or may not know, had been dramatically reduced. And in the 1940s, we had flamingos on just two islands. And one island, because of a military base next to it, the flyers and the pilots liked to chase the flamingos because they looked beautiful flying away, but they also stampeded and a lot of them died. So then we created another site that had the largest population of flamingos. And in that site is the only protected area that we have that has aerial boundaries as well. So you're not allowed to fly within, as a 500 or 5,000 feet cap on any planes coming down to minimize the destruction onto the animals. Around the time, the government also wanted to set aside strict marine reserves, which in that time was meant to be no-take areas. So they set aside four of those. And so we had a little bit of this, a little bit of that throughout the country. And as you can see on the map, you don't see too much. But then in 2002, the government said, okay, we'll expand a bunch of these sites. We'll add a new sites here, there. And so we got 13 or 12 new sites added to the system. But as you can still see, it didn't change too much. And then the two players were the Department of Marine Resources and us, the Bahamas National Trust. Then we pushed and pushed, and then in 2009, the government said, okay, we'll add two new sites and we'll expand one site. And those became a little bit more prominent on the screen. But up to that point, we were, I think, of maybe like 2% of our nearshore water protected, which I'll touch on. But around the time we started to really develop and build the NGO community in the Bahamas to support the work of the government. So in the mid to late 2000s, the environmental movement in the Bahamas had really started to gain steam. So a bunch of NGOs came together with the government and said, hey, we want to do more. Concurrently, internationally, there is this United Nations Multilateral Environmental Agreement, the Convention on Biological Diversity, started advocating for 17% of our nearshore environment to be protected. And we're like, hey, that sounds good. We want to do more protection. And so 17%, okay, we could do that. And then we were like, actually, no, man, we could go for 20%. So 20% of our nearshore environment, 20% of our marine environment. And so it was like, okay, how do we go about achieving that? So we first put together what was called an ecological gap analysis. And since 2007, we've done this 3 different times. And what an ecological gap analysis is saying is that we need to protect 20% of our environment. So what is 20% that we want to cover? Do we want 20% of our coral reefs? Do we want 20% of our mangroves? Do we want 20% of our seagrass? Do we want 20% of our spawning grounds where the fish come together to make babies and then release them in the environment? What do we want to do? So we came together, all the researchers, nonprofits, and we set aside these targets. And so we said, this is what we hope to achieve as part of these 20 by 20 goals to get to 20% of our marine environment. And then we went back and we did the ecological gap analysis to see how far from those targets we were. And every time we did it again, we saw the difference and we tried to reduce those differences so that by the time we finish in 2020, we would have had no gaps between what we wanted to protect and what we actually protected. And then to make sure that was happening, we had to collect the best available data. So we had to utilize a combination of analog and digital technology to collect data. So in the picture here, you could see a slightly younger version of me wearing my hat, sitting behind my computer in the boat, which, if you'd have told me that when I was an undergrad that I'd be using a computer in the boat, I would laugh at you. And we would go to spots, we would drop cameras, take pictures of the environment, record video, then take the GPS location, write it down, and then use that to classify the reef system. And also, if we had good enough information, we could make note on the quality, but usually you do separate work on the quality of the data. Or in the right picture here, you'd see us using transducers from boats, which thankfully became much more widely available because before I would have a mop with a fish finder at the bottom of it, holding it, hoping it wouldn't break as we towed along the boats to get the water depth every second that we can then create bathymetry maps, which are basically showing the outline of the seafloor beneath you. Kind of like you see those pretty maps where you see the hillside and all the different colors. It's kind of like that. And so we'd go to the site, and this would be like, this site here is a site that was declared for bonefish, small sharks, and birds. And this site was something we had to look at. And we got surveyed here. And I can tell you, after being stranded here for 12 hours in the sand, there's a lot of sand in that area. But someone went and processed the data prior to us going to the site, and this is how it looks. So you could see the outlines of the islands. I'm pointing on the screen, on a different screen that you can't see. And then you have all these different colors. So the creamish color is sand, or not obviously, but sand. The light lilac, maybe? Light purple color here is sparse seagrass, and the darker color is dense seagrass. And so it's like, okay, that's what they say it's here, but we need to go and validate. So we go to the site every quarter mile, we stop the boat, we take our high-tech technology, which was either a drop cam if we had one, or a bucket with glass on the bottom that we could stick off the boat. Or sometimes just your mask, stick in, and we'd stick our head in and quantify it. Is it sand? Is it seagrass? Or by chance, is it something else? And so when you put them together, you would validate, okay, yeah, this is pretty much what it is. So this is in alignment. But as technology increases, I shouldn't say but, as technology increases, the quality of the data is better improved. And so you have to use the combination of satellite imagery, drone imagery, cameras under the water to consolidate and put together a better understanding of what is being protected in a particular area. So to give you another example, this case study is from the Andros Westside National Park. It was established in 2002, but expanded in 2009/12. We got declared in 2009, but got the lease in 2012. So we had done a bunch of assessments previously. We knew where the turtles were, where the flamingos were, where the bonefish was, the iguanas, the sharks, the tarpon, and the sponges. And on the map, you can see all these different boxes, outlines of where these species go. And so you're like, okay, we really want to zone these areas, but is that enough? So then it's like, okay, we know where the pine lands is because this is also a terrestrial and marine park. We know where the blue holes are. We know where the freshwater are. We know where the seagrass is. So we consolidate them together, and then we decided we were going to come up with zones because people utilize this area for bone fishing, people utilize this area for sponging, people utilize it for recreational fishing. So when we put it together, we knew we had some extra sensitive zones that we didn't want people to go. That's pretty much where the flamingos and the iguanas are, because we don't want them to disrupt the flamingo or the iguanas. We knew we wanted to have some spots where people can set up infrastructure for kayaking, for snorkeling in the area. So we put a few recreational zones in. Then we put in a few no fish zones. Just this is for the replenishment of the area. And that's how we came together. So to do that and to do any protected area work, we really want to involve our community as best as we can. So we'll go to the community, we'll have meetings, and I'll come to the meeting as a MPA manager, as somebody been in the field, and I would say, hey guys, we think this area deserves extra protection, but we want to discuss this with you, and we don't want to do this without your support. And so you begin this process of negotiations. Now, some areas are a bit more environmentally conscious and kind of understand what you're trying to do while being aware that there is some challenges that they will face. And some areas really depend heavily on the community and can't afford to lose much access as other areas. And so you spend the time and you do across multiple trips, you go back and forth with them to set aside zones or boundaries. Now, in this picture here, you see in the middle picture these Crayola markers. And we had borrowed these Crayola markers to, draw the boundaries. But after 4 hours, we had to stack the Crayola markers side by side until everybody could agree. And then we would draw in pencil and not in paper because you wanted to keep the community aware that this is not set in stone. And then you'd come back, validating the boundaries after assessing the marine environment there, sometimes with the community members, sometimes without, and sometimes with the school groups. Then you come back and present your final boundaries. And you go to the various communities that utilize the area and make it happen. And sometimes you have a bit of a challenge where people are like, I don't know about this. I utilize this area. And some are like, no, we don't utilize this area, or we've utilized this area and we've seen the degradation over time and we would like to restore this area. So we tend to be negotiating on the basis of economic benefits, on restoring the environment, on providing education and outreach materials to the community to help support the work of the teachers at the schools. We try to go about in improving the environment to where it was previously. So some of the restoration is through environmental restoration, some of it is just through trash removal, debris removal, reconnection of the creek systems, helping to rebuild corals, to provide opportunities for corals to regrow, so coral nurseries, and so on and so forth, as well as negotiating for enforcement so that what happens in the area can happen in the area, and what illegal activities could be, reduced through this collaboration with the community. So when we do all that, as part of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Caribbean Challenge, which we signed up for, over time, we've gone the process of submitting a bunch of documents to the government. So the one in the middle was our first document in 1982, which would have been done after the first Earth Summit in 1972. And there's us setting out all the areas we thought were worth protecting in the country. Then the one on the left was when we submitted one in 2013 to the government saying these are the areas we think would get us to 10% of our waters protected. And then on the right, there was this nice little girl with a conch shell. That was us pushing for our 20% protected areas. And all of this is built on the combination of the data collected in the field, the outreach in the community, the support of the researchers, the NGOs, the government, writing these reports, proposing areas, supporting areas, identifying areas, to then say to the government, this is what we think will provide the benefits to the community, the benefits to the environment, and the benefits to the country as a whole, and allow us to meet our international targets and protect our environment for the future. And so from that document we submitted in 2013, we had an expansion over the 2012 sites. We added several big sites in the country. And then, of course, after that, we added a bunch more sites into the area. And all of these have individual maps created with habitat classifications. If we've surveyed them on the reef, we have a report identifying the health and condition of the reefs or the reef seagrass, corals, birds, trees, all that like wherever they exist. And we've consolidated them and we have them in the communities so that if anybody wants to know more, it's there. And we keep an open line of communication with our stakeholders, the people that live there and utilize the area, to make sure that we protect and do our part for the protection of the environment. And I think at that point, I want to say thank you all very much and open the floor to any questions.
Lindy, thank you for talking to us today about what it takes to establish, monitor, and manage marine protected areas. We'll now begin the Q&A portion of today's Ocean Expert Exchange. If anyone tuning in has any questions and you haven't put them in the chat already, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box and I'll ask them for you. So we'll get started with a couple questions we already have. AJ asks what the most challenging part of your job is, and on the flip side, what's the most rewarding part?
The most challenging part of the job is I am a trained biologist. So I go in the field, well, not biologist, ecologist. I don't look at individual animals, I look at the system as a whole. And I know my systems well. So I go and I say, this reef system is in terrible condition, or this is in great condition, and we must do these things. But I am one user of that environment. So I have to go back and forth with the community and with the government. So I'm only looking at it from the perspective of the environment needs protection and we should do everything in our ability to protect that, to enforce it. Whereas the other members of the community are looking at it from a different perspective. Either they're going through the reef or they're fishing from the reef. And so sometimes we align and we're both on the same page, and sometimes we're in conflict with one another. But it's that negotiation. So it almost feels as though everything about the job is dealing with people, which, later on in life, I realized that conservation is science and people mixed into one. So, it's part of the job. I just forgot that part or tuned out that part. The most rewarding part of it is I have a project that's working on planting mangroves and doing mangrove restoration. And every year we plant more and more mangroves. And sometimes you don't notice a change and then you take a year away from it. And then you come back and it's like, oh, yes, we're actually making noticeable progress and in the environment. That, and then sometimes you get to dive on a really good weather day in a really remote part of the country. And it's like, yeah, I love my job.
Oh, that's great. Lucy wants to know how you determine which species you want to study and eventually maybe protect in an area. And do you depend on a lot local knowledge to determine that?
Okay, so the first one I think it's a more individualized question. And I found everybody has a different reason for protecting their species. Or sometimes you stumble upon it in work that you do. Like I have a friend of mine who was a marine biologist, and she may even be on this call. But after a while, she really didn't like being in a marine environment, but she loved birds. And then she just pivoted and became a birder, well, an ornithologist. And she's really good at it. She was good as a marine biologist, but she's even better as a birder. Me personally, I spent many a summer by my grandparents' house and in a community called Mangrove Bush. So I swam in the mangroves, fished in the mangroves, sailed in the mangroves. So when I grew older, it was like, yeah, I like mangroves. This is great. I know other people, we especially of my generation, we watched a lot of Nat Geo and Discovery Club, not Discovery Club, Discovery Channel as kids. And you see the big charismatic species. So some people really like marine mammals, some people like dolphin, well, not dolphins, some people like sharks, some people like manatees. And you just kind of stumble into it and you're like, that's what I really want to do in my life. And then some people really gravitate towards creatures that you know are really in need of help. So I have another colleague who studies in Nassau group of which spawn in the worst weather seasons. And every year, without a doubt, if the permits allow, she'll be out there collecting data on the fish. And you're like, you couldn't study a fish that spawn in the summer when it's nice and calm? I'm sorry, what's the second part of the question?
Do you depend on local knowledge when you're
Oh,
determining what
yes.
species to study?
Yes, we definitely do. When you get into certain communities, they'll tell you, historically, we had a lot of conch, but we don't have now. If y'all get an opportunity, can y'all look at it? And so you'll take guidance from the community on what they view as important to be able to answer questions that they may have. And sometimes you think you know an environment, but when you get to someone who actually knows the local environment very well, they'll be able to pinpoint you on a exact posh part of the reef. They're like, yeah, right there is that thing you're looking for. So swim about a quarter mile, cut right, and you'll be there. And they have an understanding of the system that you rarely get. So the challenge, of course, with that is that you have to be able to translate between the language we learn in scientists and the local language. So we stick to more standardized names and approaches, and they'll have local names and local descriptions. But once you be able to understand the difference between the two, you could do a lot more, you could get a lot more work done.
Great. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but Lee has heard that conch is a pretty big fishery in the Bahamas. And are there any future plans for additional conch protections?
Yes, is the short answer. But the challenge, Lee, is that we consume 97% of all the coral, I mean, all the conch captured in the country. And so it is a staple part of our culture and community. So everything that we do related to conch has to be reflective of that. So we have set aside newer areas that may focus on conch as a species of interest. We've changed the law recently to minimize the export of conch, so the 3 or 4% that leaves the country doesn't leave the country anymore. And we're in the process of new legislation to increase the lip thickness of the conch using other means of conservation and not just protected areas. So yes, we're definitely cognizant of conch and we're trying our best to make sure that it survives.
Danley has asked if you can speak a little more about how ecotourism plays into MPA management and creation, and has ecotourism become a route of alternate income for locals?
Um, that is a thorough question. Uh, Ecotourism, we the case study I mentioned before with the Andros West Side National Park, that area is heavily utilized for bone fishing ecotourism guides. And those guides tend to be our eyes on the water a lot of times. They're out there, especially during peak season, every day, multiple times a day. They know what's happening in the environment. They know who's utilizing it, who's been there, who may be poaching, what illegal activities may be undertaken. So they are eyes and our ears. They also, because of their support with their guests, they also can influence their guests who may want to donate and become members of the organization. I should have pointed out that the BNT is a members-based organization. And we've had opportunities in the past where those who come to the area may say, okay, I enjoyed this area. but I can see you all have some challenges. I'll donate to helping the challenges. Now, some other areas we are in the process of instituting concessions agreements with the tour guides, and we're trying to make sure that we get to the point where everybody benefits. Thirdly, I have to point out where in one of the challenges we face with tourism, even in ecotourism, is the carrying capacity of the site for the tourists or for users in the area. So we have a project that started, but will kick up full force this year with 2 sites, looking at how much people we want to get into the site so that we don't degrade the system, so that when we reach the point where we could incorporate some of that alternative economics into the operation of the site, but not sacrificing the health and quality of the site for that product. If that hopefully answers. I'm not really good with the economic side, but we do benefit from it. We do utilize it and we do respect it and support it.
Theodore says hello from the Inner Ionian Archipelago in Greece and
Alright,
states
hello.
that in his country there are similar protection processes taking place. However, not in the same process you described for the Bahamas. He wonders if you ever have to incorporate issues with industries like oil and gas, fishing trawlers, etc.
Yes. One of the biggest challenges we have in country is that, or for the protected area system, is that we don't remove the rights of homeowners who may have property within the boundaries of protected areas. And as a very popular tourism destination, we oftentimes have the request for cruise ship islands to be incorporated into the park system. And you have to work with the owners to be like, please no. We don't think this is a great idea. It does not reflect the desires of the park, the needs of the park, or the community as a whole. And we would advocate you to go somewhere else. And so you have to deal with that. Previously, we've had oil licenses in countries, and some of the sites that were proposed had already been leased out for oil extraction, but thankfully they never found oil to to a viable level to where they pursued the licenses, and those are returned to us. So our main challenges are usually dealing with these large-scale tourism projects that want to take place in the country. Now, in terms of mass fishing and trawlers, we do have some challenges where people will poach in the park, but thankfully not on a large scale. For the most part, the boundaries of the parks are respected, and we've done our best in recent years to make sure that all GPS systems have the boundaries of the parks and the rules in place so that we can minimize any excuse that might exist. But as a country on a whole, we've banned longline fishing in the 1990s because we wanted to protect our sharks and pelagic fish hanging out in oceans. So as a whole, the Bahamas we fought against some of those big challenges coming into the country. But it is definitely a different understanding from what I imagine Greece is, being a much more closed in the Mediterranean with a lot of different partners and stakeholders and a strong fishing community.
Daly has another question. Also wants to know what was one of the bigger challenges of getting local stakeholders on board, and how do you approach groups that are in opposition?
Oh, there is, I think it's called not a snowball, but you try to learn the dynamics of your community. No community is a monolith. Everybody has their own interests, their own agenda. Much like we do, though, we like to call it something else but agenda, but we have our desire for something to be achieved. And so you really want to find people who the community respects to be able to be that liaison. So even though you may be in direct opposition, it doesn't have to be an angry, negative approach. We could have respectful discourse where you're like, this is why I don't like you. This is why, or not like you, I don't like the process. And for us, we found that the challenge is that we have a really famous park called the Exuma Cayes Land and Sea Park. And anytime anybody hears about a national park, they only think of that park. And it's a fully no-take park. And we're like, no, we have a bunch of parks that are zoned for other things. So sometimes it comes with us individually communicating, or meeting them where they are. So smaller fisher groups, we meet with the fisher groups, we meet with the tourism operators. Then we found that in the past, a lot of people are just opposed to something for opposition's sake. And sometimes you have to, you meet them where they are and you bring them. So we've had people fight against a couple of our protected areas, but their grandkids would come snorkeling with us one day, and then it'll be like, hey, my granddaughter was snorkeling with you all. She thought I should come. She dragged me out there. Okay, I see what y'all are trying to do. I don't agree with it, but maybe I don't oppose as much as I used to oppose. Now, there are also some people that will never don't like any kind of regulations and control. And with that, you just have to understand where they're coming from, and you don't always have to agree. It is a long-term process, and conservation is always negotiating. Every 5 to 10 years, when you redo your management plan, there's new considerations that need to be met. And it's not a really good idea, but a good answer from so far. And that's why we have the socioeconomists who actually know what they're doing with community groups, and you defer to them a lot of times, because you leave it to me, it's just like, okay, we need to talk, we need to talk, we need to visit. And hopefully over the next 20 years, we could reach closer grounds with each other.
Mhm. We have time for just a few more questions. Sophie asked, does B&T also evaluate and use aquaculture or nurseries to help with to repopulate species and newly protected areas?
Well, yes. We have a very small project in one of our parks called the Mariah Harbour Key National Park, and we are doing a conch-hatchery there, partnering with Megan Davis of, I think it's FAO? No, FAU? Maybe not, or UFL. She's based in Florida, and she does a lot of conch-hatcheries around the place. We've not had the most success with it, primarily because the last 2 years have been ridiculously hot in the summer. And every time we get them to some stage, the heat just spikes, and it kind of reduces the success ratio. Previously, we've also done work looking at coral restoration using coral nurseries. So we outplant them, and we've had some degree of success with them. But then once again, tying back into the heat, the last 2 years have been really trying for any corals in the Bahamas. And then, of course, we've gotten hit with stony coral tissue loss disease, which, if in Florida, you guys may be aware of that as well. And so it's been a challenge, but yes, we try to incorporate whatever means and methods we can to restore our areas.
And, for our final question, Rose asked if you need a graduate school degree to do what you do, and if you have any advice to give an early career professional who may want to get involved in your field.
Oh, that's a great question. I'd say you don't need one, but in the Bahamian context, a lot of times we've found that master's degrees have become the basic degrees for a lot of things. A lot of countries really put pressure on you to have at least a master's degree. I was told by someone I respected many years ago, it's like the bachelor's degree teaches you how to read, the master's degree teaches you how to write. And as much as I would love to be in the field 80% of the year, having the ability to write and to clearly articulate your thoughts is very important. So I would say, as boring as it might be, trying to keep in the habit of writing is important. Also, anybody younger in early career, coding is super important. I grew up with SPSS, and I have a colleague who tried to teach me R, and it's just way over my head. But being able to analyze, interpret, and represent your data is important. Additionally, oral communication is very important. You need to be able to translate between what is said in the communities, as well as at a scientific conference. We had a prime minister who once said he was able to speak to the man under the dock and the queen at the same time, and he could just alternate back and forth. Finding what you're passionate about is really important. One of the things that this job is that you get a lot from it, but it also takes a lot out of you. And if you aren't passionate about it, you can get burnout really quickly. Even when you're passionate about it, you can also get burned out because this is something that you dedicate your life towards trying to save the world as best as you can. So ideally, being able to communicate yourself, being able to analyze and interpret data, being able to teach others how to do what you want to do, being a safe researcher, diver, whatever you want to go in. So you want to get, if you're going to be a scuba diver, get as all the scuba diving and keep practicing. Get some good swim practice in the laps in the pools, because sometimes we only scuba dive and it really is we lose the fundamental skills of swimming. So you got to keep those into place. And trying to find a way to work with others. Because I found over the years, one of the hardest things to do is to work with somebody you may not automatically like. And it has to be trying to find that balance of professionality. Once you have a good team and you get in the field and you could share ideas with each other, support each other, and work together, sometimes you have great, 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 great years. And I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you so much. We do want to thank everyone for tuning in today, and special thank you to Lindy for taking the time to share his work on MPAs with us. If you'd like to take a look at the K through 12 extension resources related to today's topic, they will be made available along with a recording of today's talk on the UF Earth Systems YouTube channel. For more information on scientists in every Florida school or Anjari Foundation, you can visit our web pages and follow us on social media. While this is the final event in our spring series, we are already gearing up for our fall lineup, so please stay tuned for updates on more great presentations to come later this year. And in the meantime, on behalf of Scientists in Every Florida School and Anjari Foundation, we want to thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at a future Ocean Expert Exchange.